Welcome, listener, to Lost and Searching. I'm Seven, your host, and today we're speaking to Tom Adeyoola. Tom was the founder and CEO of a tech scale-up called Metail, which sold for 8 figures. He's the co-founder of Extend Ventures. He's also a non-executive director of Channel 4 and has done policy work with the UK government. And today we have a really in-depth chat about his journey over the course of over a decade, building a tech scale-up, and all of the challenges, lessons, learnings, and love that came out of all of that for and in and around leadership and the journey. And honestly, it's a challenging story at certain points. It's a heartfelt story. It's bittersweet in many ways. Tom goes through a lot of challenges, as he describes it, pushing the boulder up the hill and hoping that the hill will flatline. And sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes you're pushing for a long time, and the discipline and determination is really, really key. He's since gone on to help a lot of people and try to help even more, and still being super involved in the industry. And so his perspective on leadership is really firsthand, which is so epically valuable. So I do hope that you take away a lot and enjoy. And so with all that being said, let's get into it. Your career has taken you through a number of different experiences where you have gone through leadership roles, responsibilities, and challenges yourself. You've also seen it up close from more objective points of view as well. But I really like to start off by getting to know who we're talking to. Tom, what are some of the most significant experiences that have shaped who you are today?
Well, if we go all the way back, so
Mhm.
I'm a Londoner, but both my parents came to London. They weren't born and raised here. My mum's Norwegian. She came to the UK as an au pair. My dad's Nigerian. He came here, worked in marketing, ended up working for TfL on buses. He used to work nights. My mum worked in day nurseries and social services. And I think from that starting point, effectively um, being of immigrant background and immigrant cultures, uh, that sense of like, who am I? Where's my place? I think that I never fit specifically into one group or other. Certainly,
Mhm.
I remember from primary school, and then I was pushed by my father to sort of like do entrance exam to independent school over the river. Grew up in Hammersmith, uh, independent school called St Paul's over in Barnes. I got in. I wasn't tutored. I got in on the strength of the interview part of the process because a bunch of the exam I'd left unfilled because I hadn't been taught those specific maths questions. But it was a case of like, oh, why did you not answer these questions? And I was like, well, never been taught them. So in the interview, the interviewer did the example. I think it was the head at the time, and I easily did the rest. So it was a case of like, oh, okay, well, you're smart and adaptable, and actually
Sure.
it's just a knowledge issue, not a inability to solve issue. And then I went over to independent school, and I think at that point that was a massive uh, culture shock. I think so. I went from a primary school where I was working by myself a lot of the time, uh, and no homework, to an independent school, was in a classroom, had a summer school element of it where I was then suddenly like thrown into like Latin and French subjects I was not akin to, and history, something I found really difficult, again, because my parents were not from here. So I didn't have history knowledge of the UK. I didn't know all the kings and queens and the background, and it felt like I was therefore on the back foot in a lot of the classes I was in from the get go. And within a term, having just started to make friends, I was moved into the scholarship form with even brighter kids, and it was a proper hot house, and I was suddenly doing 3 hours homework a night. And that like was intense. And I think that was a hugely intense part of my life from age 12, surviving that and also winning, getting into the top 4 of, I would say 4 or 5 in each subject, and getting a scholarship then into the senior part of the school was a big, I think, moment for me of like understanding I could deal with pressure, survive, progress. And then the senior school was not the hothouse that the junior school was. And that's where I started to thrive. And I took on board and I immersed myself in every type of extracurricular activity like available, from sport, I captained the football team, the athletics team, I was in the first team for rugby. I joined the debating team. We won the nationals to represent the UK for European Youth Parliament. I captained my house. I was vice captain of the school. It was a place where I felt that if I worked hard, there was a reward coming back the other way. And I reveled in that sense of work and rewards and interest in being curious about different subjects, whilst at the same time recognizing that, I wasn't always the best in things, and also being envious of the other kids who potentially had a deep passion about one thing. So the people who were amazing at English or amazing at history or a language, I was curious about lots of different things. So I started to have a bit of a worry of like, am I a jack of all trades and a master of none?
Well, the saying, the full saying, jack of all trades is a master of none, but much more useful than the master of one.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it served you pretty well.
Yeah. And I think that's the bit where I realized much later in life, as I moved into and gaining the confidence to start my own thing, that was where I realized that actually being interested in and being able to have high level of skill in multiple disciplines was super useful in terms of being a founder. Like I could do everything from the accountancy through to marketing at a high enough level of skill. So then it was a case of like, I want to hire people who are better than me in each of those. Right? I didn't have a fear of it. I understood what amazing was, and that was something I learned from school. It's like, I know what amazing is, but I also know where I sit, and I was comfortable about where I sat.
A quick question on that. So that was partly through the schooling system, but you also mentioned community, right? Kind of feeling like you didn't quite fit into any one group. It sounds like that was a little bit influenced by the fact that neither of your parents were English as well. To what extent did that make you more or less comfortable with standing out? Did you feel the need to fit in at that age, or did you just kind of get comfortable standing out and being a little bit, I think, different or feeling different?
No, I think probably I was a conformist, definitely through school and early university, I would say. And again, sort of basically just relying on doing work well as my means of standing out.
Okay.
And being given a challenge and delivering on the challenge, that for me was everything. It was like, I'm going to show people. So I'm never going to allow myself to be othered in a way that isn't relating to like having tried my hardest and succeeding from that perspective. And the bit I did sort of almost hate and had an allergic reaction to was this like networking and this idea of like a sense of, I didn't have a family network in the UK. So it wasn't a case of like understanding, and this is all pre-internet, right? So of like, what job would I do in the future? I had no idea. I couldn't get work experience working for uncle's, bank or whatever. There weren't easy people to ask about in terms of like what entrepreneurialism was, etc. So that sense of like, how did you plug into British life? I didn't feel that I had that. And so like the idea of Britishness was sort of like a, a chocolate box view. It was like I wasn't connected through, even though I went to an independent school, and through that had access to like amazing speakers who'd come in school. I saw Tony Blair when he was a shadow come in to speak, Neil Kinnock, there, and you could tell from like hearing them speak that they were another level up. Like, Tony Blair, you could see the person he was going to become, and like, wow, different caliber and different level to other politicians we had come through the door at school and give talks. That part was illuminating, but that sense of like feeling that you were able to be in a room or comfortable in a room, I think probably came for me later. But the groundwork that was done at school of knowing that I was capable, I think was important to give the confidence for the later. So like, I think, going to university, I did economics at university. The gravy train would have been into banking. I did an internship in a bank, but I hated it. I felt like this isn't a place for me. This is like shuffling paper. Surely work is more interesting than that. And I think I hadn't really quite worked through with myself what my motivational structure was and a sense of purpose. But I knew that like banking really felt like just staying in educational institution ad infinitum. It felt like it was the same old banter. It was almost like a way of escaping joining the real world. And in fact, when I meet with friends today who spent their time in banking since basically university, it feels like they haven't moved on, right? So they're still in the same, they're still talking to the same old tropes that you had from school, that the same sort of hierarchical structure of banter and discussions, and their view on the world is I feel is quite limited. As per the fact that by working in banking, they've been highly focused and narrowed on specific job type and the job function. So, that wasn't for me. And I think at least I worked that out and realized that. And I remember doing my internship, and my intern pay was more than my parents paid. And that was a moment where we lived in Hammersmith. We always used to walk along the river and past the, what was the restaurant called? A particular restaurant, River Cottage. What was it? I can't remember its full name. But I'd always said to my mum, "Oh, when I get my first job, I'm going to take us there." And we went there for lunch, and lunch was really expensive. And my mum felt uncomfortable, and therefore it wasn't the joyous, like, look, I've made some money, we can come and eat here. Isn't that great experience that I was hoping it was going to be? In fact, it was just a full-on uncomfortable experience. So that sense of like, oh, okay, like this isn't, having the money and then being able to go here isn't the end of generating cash that I want or that I thought it would be. And actually the pursuit of that in and of itself is not interesting and doesn't lead to satisfaction. Certainly not satisfaction I can share at a family level. So I think that was like my first insight to that. Naturally, I was able to buy myself a computer, which was a great thing from having an internship and at least working out that I didn't want to do that. But then working out or trying to understand what then would be my path was a difficult one. And I think leaving university, a lot of my friends went through that challenge of a few years of like, actually, what do I want to be doing? I ended up having not joined a bank, I joined a consultancy, and my week one was being sent on a project to work on the merger of Astra and Zeneca in Norway. So I was sent to Norway, week one, and I was told, don't let them know that you can speak Norwegian. We just want you to listen in the background and hear what they're saying. So I was basically a spy in my first job.
That's so exciting. I mean, you're like, oh, it's whatever. I'm like, what? You got paid to spy?
Yeah,
That's to get paid to spy.
Well, I mean, getting paid, you're getting paid ex post. So it was like
Sure.
the first week where I suddenly was having to spend loads of money on taxis, like terrified that my credit card was going to max out. But no, it was a good first job. The internet boom was starting to happen. And that was then the sort of beginnings of the realization of like, there's an exciting thing happening over here. How do I become part of that world? And that dragged me into the startup world.
You know what? It's so interesting that hindsight's always 2020, right? Everything from taking control of how you stood out, right? I'm not going to be othered by something I can't control. I'll be othered by my own hard work. Straight through to appreciating the things that you did enjoy and the things that you didn't, and getting the opportunity to learn those things early. It sounds like all of that added up to shape the beginning of your journey building startups in ways that you never could have imagined. And it's fascinating to me to reflect on this, because this is the case for almost all of us. We accidentally stumble into the rest of our lives. And on one hand, it's almost annoying, but on the other hand, it's also really exciting. But the journey is not easy, right? That's the beginning of the journey. Talk to us more about how you got started running your first company and what that experience was like.
Yeah, I would say, so if I go back then to like actually when I started as a consultant, in the background, the internet was starting, like happening. And actually with a friend, a school friend, we started thinking about trying to enter the internet race at that time. And we almost got something up and running. We were having interesting meetings with, senior people in card companies. We were looking at e-greeting cards and vouchers, and we were getting quite far. But then at that time, a company in the US, which had Whoopi Goldberg as its ambassador, called Flues, was announced that they were coming to the UK. So we were like, oh, it's too late. We're born too late. The ship has sailed. It's not going to happen. Whereas I know another school friend who then, he did quit university. He was at University of Manchester, and he raised 2 million quid at that time from JP Morgan, which was quite a thing. And we did some consultancy work for him in helping basically present his business, which was interesting. And through that, even though we didn't start our own thing, the first Tuesday Club was happening at that time. And I got approached to join Sportal. But funnily enough, I didn't accept it immediately. There was another consultant at the company I was at who was complaining a lot about working where we were and really wanted to work in sport. So I said, this is a sports internet company. Why don't you take it? So I offered it to him, and he didn't do anything for 2 weeks. So I said, oh, if you're not going to do anything, then I'll take it. And that's a weird thing, right? So if he'd actually, followed through on his complaints and moaning, he could have taken that, and our paths would have gone differently. But I subsequently learned that basically all the people who moan the most in companies are the people who are never going to leave. People who are quiet, who do, and they're the ones to always worry about. And he ended up staying there for years and subsequently moved into the pharmaceutical industry, which are the main clients that he had at that time. Whereas I went and I moved over to Sportal, and then that set me on the path of being like a strategy guy, a clever guy working for senior management. And I jumped across with senior management from place to place. I went from Sportal for a year, and that went boom to bust. I worked for the commercial director there, and I pre-vetted all deals. I ran e-commerce at the same time, and pre-early days. And then I went from there with the marketing director to Hutchinson 3G, which was 0 to 1,700 people in a year. 0 to 10 billion raised before a single penny earned to run the mobile phone network, which is now called Three. And then I went back to work for my CEO from Sportal to help start up Jet Europe as head of strategy there, which was taking the sort of prepaid phone card model to private jets, like buying fractions of private jets and then subdividing them into hours and then selling them off to Nouveau Riche in Europe predominantly, and sports stars. So that's 3 companies, but working with people. So off the back of my reputation for being good at those different places, before then jumping and working at Warner Brothers, which was a blue chip company and very boring. And this was in my journey of like, what am I? What do I want to be? I'm a clever guy who works for senior management. I've worked in different industries. Oh, I really love film. Maybe I should go and work for Warner Brothers. And it's like, oh my God, this is really boring.
What was going through your mind at the time? Were you trying to figure out who you were, so to speak, what you wanted?
I was very much trying to figure that out. And also I was very much in a role where I felt I was a number 2, actually. So, like, as in, I'm not a number 1. I'm not a CEO type. So when we were trying to create that internet idea, it was my friend who was the big brass, loads of ideas, 100 a minute, and I was the one doing the work.
Got you.
And I had, and I was like, I'd got myself into my head that I was the secondary person. I was a supporting person. I was like potentially the CRO type person longer term rather than the front man. And especially sort of thinking about, well, I don't have like a family background of entrepreneurship that I can see. I don't have any like money. So I'm following rather than leading in some respects. And hence, I think after I'd worked at Warner Brothers, I was a little bit lost really. But in my spare time, I'd been doing some side hustle stuff. So I was managing a friend's band, which was a lot of fun. So I learned a lot about PR, marketing, getting into an industry. So I was actually doing some leading stuff, but not realizing it. And I clearly had the like urge, but I'd been a strategy guy, clever guy, and I'd never managed teams of people. So it wasn't out then until like after Warner Brothers, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Where's my career going? I talked to an old guy that I worked at Jet who'd been to business school, and he connected me to a bunch of his cohort to have conversations. And like one was running a psychometric testing company. So he got me to do a psychometric test for free and then took me out for dinner. And then another woman. And actually, I think that's interesting because when I did that psychometric test, I ended up with one sort of like the ENTP stuff. Ended up with 1 rating. And then when I did it later, I ended up slightly different. So I wonder whether that's like a bit of my emergence of confidence out of that era to a different era.
Interesting.
But instead, and I was wondering, oh, do I need to go to business school? Blah, blah, blah. What am I? Am I blocked down a cul-de-sac of being a strategy guy, work with senior management? And hence I sort of need to follow managers I worked with before. And I talked to one of his old friends who said, no, don't be silly. Like, come and work for me. And she convinced me to come and work for her to solve a consultancy problem and selling project they needed to do, which was massively in depth around opening up the gaming industry to open networked broadband concept. And I joined that as the sort of secondary consultant with a lead consultant on the project. But a couple of weeks into that project, the lead consultant left. So I was suddenly like holding the baby. And I think over the course of the month, did loads of interviews. I wrote 100, that was a 100-page document that I delivered in a month. Sold in that project to Gala Group, and they then bought £2 million project off the back of that, which made everyone their bonuses that year. And that was the consultancy theory of like, this is what you should do. And then I was basically given the opportunity to like make it happen. So that was like that was, I think, was a really key moment for me, because it was like I'd been used to being club guy, working with senior management in the room, in the CEO room when decisions are getting made, and ask my opinion and pre-vetting stuff, to, okay, you now need to leave this room to go and run a business unit to then earn your right to come back. So it was like a big risk moment, managing teams of people to actually like execute on this. First people I was managing were older than me, and trying to deliver a project where the initial products we had were broken from the beginning, like to make the trial work of the 2 million to then deliver it like a massive contract. I was doing 100-hour weeks. It was like mad. Like it's like proper hardcore, intense. We're working in the casino industry, bingo industry. Over the course of 18 months, built the casino division from 0 to 70% of the UK market and took it international. And that was a period where effectively with the casinos, when I was doing 100-hour weeks, it was like working at work and going to the casino until the casinos closed at 6 in the morning, and going back, sleeping for a couple of hours, then going back into work to try and fix the problems of seeing live on the floor. I remember one particular case, we had a memory leak in the server. It was like server-based gaming. So we had the server live in the casino, Russell Square Casino. And I knew there was a memory leak, which would mean that effectively once a memory leak happened, if you were playing on the terminals, you were operating slower than real life. So that means you could bet on an event that had already, so guaranteed win. So it was like, you knew that was going to be a problem. So I remember, but to complete the trial, we needed 99% uptime. So how are we going to deliver that? So I was like from midnight till 4 in the morning, watching every spin, waiting for that latency issue, and then seeing it at 4 in the morning, full casino, 700 people, and then going, stop, and getting all the dealers to stop so I could go down and manually reboot the server. And then like, everything's all right. So like downtime of like 2 minutes, right? And that's it, done, ready to go. Whilst in the background, then going back to work, like we got to finish fix the memory leak, which we did over the period. We managed to hit our uptime delivery, managed to get that going. But in the same time, we were building, building the airplane whilst you're in midair. If there were issues in the casino, and we built such a good relationship, me and my team, with the casino, that they would call us directly or email us on any issue. So I would get used to waking up in the middle of the night to clear down emails. Otherwise, I'd wake up in the morning with 80 emails. So I'd be like, I need to clear my emails at 4 in the morning. And I'd be getting calls at any time of night. So I think it was like a year in, I needed to escape. And I was like, proper stress. So like, how am I going to escape? I went to Borneo to trek through the jungle for 11 days because I was like, that's the only way that I knew that people can get hold of me. And I'm scared of all sorts of insects, and Borneo has the largest of every type of man. But that was my holiday. I'm grateful I did it. And there was like one point on that trek where it was a 3-hour climb to then be able to text. But that, yeah. And I got through that, took that international. And I think that experience was like, okay, I'm not just a clever guy working for senior management. I can take concept through to scale the rollout. And I've just built a whole load of wealth for other people. So I need to, and I don't like the industry. I'm not a gambler. I'm not a gamer. I can do this myself. So that was it. That was a key life experience and a key moment of shifting the dial in me personally from what is my real potential.
Joe Dispenza's got a great saying, Dr. Joe Dispenza. He has a great saying, your personality shapes your personal reality. And as you went through these experiences, you built the evidence that influenced your confidence, that shaped or changed or altered your personality. And it sounds like that started to shape your personal reality. You went from seeing yourself in the background and therefore being in the background to seeing yourself as someone who could activate and could make things happen.
Yeah.
And then you went on to do that. Talk to us about that first business, proper business.
Yeah. So I think then for me, thinking about the business I wanted to do, that was the sort of first moment of like taking control of the situation. I work for other people, right? Being smart for other people. And this is like, well, if I'm going to be building my own thing, what do I want that to be? And how big do I want that to be? And that was a sense of like, well, I want to go after a big problem, and I want it to be meaningful. And it probably took a year to work out what that was. And during that period, I had a couple of other friends where we basically had a monthly, we called the Monday Night Club, which was like getting together to just brainstorm ideas against each other.
I love it.
And like that crew, like one subsequently became a CTO somewhere else and one became a COO somewhere else. But it was that sense of like batting ideas. And then, the idea that then sort of stuck with me was this concept of essentially being able to try clothes on and see how they fit, and how online clothing was no better than in-store experience. My wife was complaining. We went to Vietnam for 3 weeks, and she ended up having some stuff tailor-made in Hoi An. And it's like, why did we have to travel across the world for you to find this type of garment here that would work? And why is the experience still hot and sweaty in store, and still like online, there's so much uncertainty about what you're getting and what the fit's like. And weirdly, like before I joined Sportwear, I nearly joined, and I'd interviewed at a company called Boo.com, which was the poster child for the boom to bust era of the internet. So they raised 180 million, blown it all in a year. And there's a great book, Boohoo, about that experience. And coincidentally, the head of business development at Boo.com was my CEO at Inspired Gaming Group, which is where I was at the time whilst I was thinking about the next thing. So I was like, this story and quite a few of the people who'd worked there. So I spent a lot of time, and I really understood why Boo.com had failed then. And it was like, well, how could it work now? And at the same time, I was in the process of trying to create the world's first live blackjack and baccarat game. I wanted to use cameras to recognize cards as they're being dealt live at a casino, to build a gaming engine off the back of it. And I had Googled, I was in Macau having watched live baccarat, and I was like, yes, this is definitely a concept I need to build. And I just Googled leading expert computer vision, and the first hit was Professor Roberto Cipolla at Cambridge University, and it had his telephone number. So I just cold called from my hotel room. I've never used a hotel room phone before or since. I got through first time. I didn't even check what time of day it was or anything. And I remember speaking to him and saying, look, I want to build this from scratch using cameras. How feasible do you think it is? Like, is there off-the-shelf software? And he said, yeah, no problem. Come visit me. And try this thing. And he gave me a signpost towards some off-the-shelf stuff that you could basically play around with. I did that, went up to visit him, ended up commissioning one of his ex-PhD students to build a proof of concept, which worked. And whilst I was there, he showcased a whole bunch of research he'd done on going from photographic images of Antony Gormley and the statues to 3D model. So I was like, wow, okay, this is interesting. And then combined with just, I think a month earlier or a month later, going to Vietnam, it was like, maybe this is how you solve the online clothing fit problem, through computer vision. Like that is the leap forward. And as an analytical brain and understanding systems, always for me, it was like, I want a big enough problem, like something that passes the toothbrush test. According to Larry Page, something you think about more than once a day, for it needs that to be big enough. And it needs something where the UK potentially has an edge. And I think on the computer vision R&D, the UK did have an edge. So I always felt that for UK-based companies, certainly in the internet era, the US equivalent would raise 10 times more cash than you and could just outgun you with pure money and hyper marketing. So it was like, how could you build a UK business based around IP? So that was exciting. And I spent time around that. And also in conversing with my Monday night club, I was like, oh, I think I need to build this and I need a computer vision person to build it. So I don't think I can build it with you guys, but I'm going to take it and run with it. And at the time, my company was about to be sold. This is late 2007 to Icelandic banks. I had some options. My bosses were going to become wealthy. They were like, oh, this is an interesting idea you've got. We'll be investors in your business. So great. And I negotiated to leave and continued to consult for my old company a couple of days a week for a period of 5 months. And then I think 3 times there were problems with the deal, and then the deal collapsed the night before it was going to go through. Icelandic banks, 2007. Yeah, we all know
what hiring.
everything collapsed. So my bosses
no.
never became rich. Over the course of the next 12 months, the share price of the company, because the company was a public company, collapsed by 99%. So and for me, with no real assets, savings behind me, it was like that was going to be my anchor for this business, and suddenly that was gone. I had flat with a high mortgage at the time, but I still thought, do you know what? I'm going to go for it. And I got a lodger in to help cover the mortgage. Thankfully, I was in a renegotiation point, so I moved to base rate tracker, and the interest rates collapsed over the course of the next year. So my mortgage as well came down, and the consultancy kept me ticking over, and I gradually over the course of that year learned how to survive on £600 a month. Basically, it was like, how can you like bring everything down? And then my girlfriend ended up moving in as well. And I, bootstrapped, got a lot of favors from a friend to help build a prototype, convinced that ex-PhD student who'd built the proof of concept to join the business, subject to me raising 100,000, which I managed. I got friends and family around, literally, 10K from an aunt, 10K from a school friend, 10K from a university friend, 10K from an old boss, the woman who I'd originally talked to, who convinced me to join Inspired, and then 10K from a random guy I met at the top of a gherkin. And I got 10K myself of a loan, where you can't, at that point, you could get a loan for a business, but you could get a loan to buy a car. So that's what I did. And that was my working capital to get moving. And actually from telling that story to government, that's what inspired the SEIS scheme. So around encouraging friends and family to invest in people at that early stage and not be discouraged around moving out of already tax efficient savings mechanisms like ISAs. So they shouldn't feel that they're losing out on their ISA by investing in a friend. So that was a key moment. And that random guy at the top of a gherkin, he ended up joining the business years later and moving to Singapore for me to start up our Asia office.
That sounds like a whole story in and of itself. Who is this guy randomly at the top of the gherkin? What happened there?
Yeah, so he was a guy he was a banker wanting to be in venture, and he's now obviously like post me. And he was he was working really hard, interested in startups, and probably, I would say, investing a far higher percentage of his savings in startups than you would
Probably
encourage
recommend
somebody to do.
Yeah. You know what? This is interesting because there's so much like serendipity throughout this story, but there's a concept of engineering serendipity.
Yeah. And I think it's like that, it's attributed to Gary Player, but I don't think he came up with the quote of like, the more he practices, the luckier he gets. And I think the same applies in startups or any other walk of life. It's like the harder you work, or the more you put yourself into situations that could generate a meeting of chance, the luckier you'll be, right? So you've got to put yourself in those positions. You've got to go to a networking event. You've got to be in a place which might lead you to bumping into people. Like if I hadn't gone to that event at the Gherkin, I wouldn't have bumped into something. And like I hate networking like everyone else. And I would have a rule for networking, which is that my goal was to just to have 2 interesting conversations. Once I had those 2 interesting conversations, I could leave. And that an interesting conversation could have been with the bar staff. It's just about, will I remember the conversation? Will they remember the conversation? That's all that's important. Not who's the most important person in the room. How can I badger them and irritate them? It's like, how can I have a genuine connection? How can I make eye contact in a way that they want to speak to me? I want to speak to them. And that's worked for me. Like in terms of getting our first commercial partner, that was from going to a networking event, having a conversation with somebody who remembered me, who then mentioned me to the editor of Draper's magazine, which was the fashion Bible, who then mentioned me to Peter Williams, who was the ex-CEO of Selfridges and also on the board of ASOS, who then mentioned it to the product director at ASOS, who then gave me a call. This is like 6 months after I'd had that interesting conversation with somebody at a networking event. So that all happened in the background, right? So
what do you think would have happened if the deal with your old employer had gone through? If the banking crisis had happened a little later or the deal went through a little earlier?
I think if that deal had gone through, I would have had the money and we'd have flamed out in 12 months.
Why?
Because we'd have spent the money on going quickly and attacking the problem. And I think actually a lot of the stuff that we're trying to solve needed the right type of skills, expertise, and time. So I needed to spend the time understanding the market and thinking about the business model and where the sort of value add potential was. And then also through that period, like one of the first things it did with the money was fund a PhD student of Professor Roberto's, like co-fund his PhD, which meant that a year later, he finished that trying to understand, like, could you build 3D accurate representations of people from basic images and basic information? And off the back of that, I got the right to patent, he got the right to publish. And that was like, it was just going to take that skilled person that amount of time to get to that answer. If we'd have had the money, we'd have spent that money on like front-end UX and those sort of people in advance of the background IP and technology that we actually needed, which was time dependent. So like when you're in that sort of model of once you take the cash, you have to operate at a certain speed time frame. And whilst R&D gives you a sense of direction and the sense that a potential breakthrough is possible, you have to re-engineer that and you have to build the productized form of that, and it takes 3 times longer and it costs 3 times more to try and deliver that against that. And I think I would have been naive. Like, yeah, I would have got an office, I would have got product people, and we would have all been just like building stuff which wasn't interesting. Whereas it was actually the tech breakthrough and the IP breakthrough which would then convince an ASOS to like, oh, maybe we should progress and discuss more. And even with that, right? So once I had people on the ground and had a team and we had our first commercial meeting with ASOS, the meeting was like at 9 a.m. At 8 a.m, we had nothing.
What?
So like our tech wasn't working, and everybody been working all night to try and get it to work. And me and my product guy, we were like, got to go to the meeting. So we got ready, got on to the meeting. I remember finding a penny on the way to the meeting. Find a penny, pick it up all day long, you'll have good luck. And as we were in the overground going to the meeting, like our tech guys were like, we think we got it working. We think we got it working. Like 8 a.m. And so we were on with our laptops on the overground, like dramatically try and change PowerPoint and shift things along, and got to that meeting, and it was like a rough and ready demo prototype, but it basically did work. It showed the future. It was rough, but it showed the future. And off the back of that, ASOS were like, yeah, it's great, let's go. And it was like, we didn't have anything as we left the office to go to the meeting. And during that, we then suddenly did. And then a lot of things then happened in like over the course of the next 3 weeks. And that was a moment as well where we were running out of our round. We were then trying to get a bridge. And therefore, by having that meeting, that enabled us to get a bridge round. And then during organizing that bridge round, I got a call, which was like, can I be in Israel tomorrow? I was like, let me see the flights. I can't be in tomorrow, but the day after, yeah, that's fine. I flew to Tel Aviv and had a meeting with an apparel industrialist in the UK, and then met him back in London 2 weeks later and shook hands on a deal for him to put over $1 million into the business. So it was like,
Do you know what? The series
shift.
of events.
Boom, 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 boom.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, we got nothing, we're dead.
It's been such a wild ride. And all of it started because what you wanted didn't happen, right? You wanted that original deal in 2007 to go through. And it's interesting that often what we want is not what we need.
Yes.
And what you ended up needing, so to speak, was for that to fall through so that different money that you treated differently came in instead, which led to this series of events.
Yeah.
What are the chances? I mean, you can't predict these things. You can't write this stuff.
Yeah. And I think we had sort of like several of those moments. And I think a couple of times as well when I was fundraising, the week that the fundraising came through, we had like minus money. And it was like, and calling around bluff where they were trying to renegotiate the terms and then basically threatening to walk away to then get them to do the deal. Like, and it like going back to the ASOS one, for example, they were going to be our commercial launch partner. We'd taken this money. We're having difficulties getting the product right. We were having some pushback from lower people down in the organization on the quality of the product, but the product director wanted to push forward. I then got pulled into a meeting with the CEO of ASOS at the time. And this is as I'm negotiating that £1 million to come in. And then he was like, right, okay, we want to take a stake in your business. I was like, oh, interesting, okay. And I was like, and what does that entail? And he goes, oh, you can use our offices and our people. I was like, hold on a minute. Like, what about money? No. You can use that. I was like, well, actually, I've just agreed for cash money into the business. We're working with you. We need cash. And then, like, he then went ballistic, like shouting and screaming, shouting at his product director. I was like, wow, okay. Left that meeting. The product director was like, I think I've lost my mojo. I'm going to take a sabbatical. Don't tell my team. I was like, what? What's just happened? And then he left the business for 3-4 months, took a sabbatical. And that was a moment of like, shit. He's our core guy. He's now gone. He's our sponsor. What are we going to do? And I think in that was a big learning moment of like, if you go into a business, you really have to land and expand. You have to make a project can not just rely on one key sponsor, because if that person goes, other people are dealing with their own projects, right? And there's a lot of not made here syndrome, and there's a lot of like survival of the fittest between executives where they want others to fail and they want to ascend to the throne. So we suddenly went into go slow mode with like potential launch. He came back a couple of months before our hoped for launch. He was no longer top dog. And it was like, sorry, we're not going to launch with it. I was like, oh my God, we're potentially dead. And then this was another one of those serendipitous moments of like my old housemate, his partner was temping at Tesco, and she overheard in the booth next to her, the clothing team talking about wanting to do something new and an interesting project, and like, was there potential to do try-on technology and blah, blah, blah. And she piped up and said, "Oh, I know a friend of mine who's working on that sort of stuff. Would you like me to introduce you?" And that was like the week after like the ASOS thing collapsed. Was like, I got a call from Tesco saying, "Oh, can you come in and have a chat?" And then that went from, we were hoping to launch with ASOS for Christmas to like moving at speed to end up launching with Tesco in February. And that switch saved, like, I think we were just very lucky that they were highly motivated and wanting to do something at that time, in that moment. The downside of the February launch was that's when I was getting married.
The damper on the wedding.
And like the week of my wedding, we'd done everything, got everything ready to launch, and the key stakeholder at ASOS was like, "Oh, trying on the virtual try-on," and she was like, "Oh, this says I'm a size 12, I'm a size 10. Doesn't work. We need to rethink before we launch." Shit, like, and then me going, "Crap, what am I going to do? I need to tell my wife maybe we can't go on honeymoon, like, because we need to sort this out." And we had every size of that dress, thankfully. And to her credit, we went in the next day and said, "Look, please, can you try on and see? Can we see? Let's do the taste test here." And to her credit, she tried them on and said, "Oh, actually, you're right. In this, I'm a size 12." And launch was back on.
Okay.
And the launch then happened whilst I was on the side of a volcano in Nicaragua. I was piggybacking off an office I found at 4 a.m, which had Wi-Fi that I could basically like piggyback off. And it was pitch black, and I was outside dialing in with the team, make sure the launch went okay.
What and where are we in the timeline now? So what year is
that? Is 2012.
This is beginning of 2012. Oof. I mean, and
that's 4 years after I'd started the company.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a significant amount of time. That when you tell the story like this, sounds like a blip, but a lot must have happened during that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're dealing with this like 4 years of basically uncertainty, trying to make things stick. And then you finally have this launch. It must have gone fairly well.
Yeah. I mean, it did go well. We got a huge amount of traction. We launched at that time. I don't know if you remember, like, this was when Facebook was predominantly on desktop and they allowed applications within Facebook. And so this was launched as a Facebook app within Facebook. We ended up winning Innovation of the Year at Tesco, as voted for by the C-suite team. It had like a huge amount of traction, did well. Like, again, you think you're then on a pathway, and then we started to get other clients like Warehouse and other UK-based vehicles, and we were starting to have conversations abroad. And then the team we were dealing with at Tesco, because this being a great project, and we'd beaten other projects like the South Korean virtual shopping wall, where they had product on the station, you could just look at it and then shop while you're at the station. The team got promoted. So they got promoted somewhere else, and then we were left with somebody with not creative, not forward-thinking, not innovative type people managing the typical people who are managing the clothing estate. And they were a bit not made here. It's not our thing. And we were hitting all of our milestones. At the time, working with them had become painful in the sense of we had a contract with Tesco, but we didn't see any cash for a year. It took them a year to pay us.
I know, and I've heard about these supermarkets and like the amount of time they take to pay you.
Yeah.
And I guess nothing's changed in the last decade.
And they even had the gall to ask whether I introduced them to an ad agency who then they wanted to use. They had the gall to ask me whether I could pay that ad agency and they'd pay me back. I was like, I have a startup. Yeah, like, And that was before then. I had no sympathy for them when they then had a massive accountancy scandal, which took down the CEO because they're effectively just, paying people late and taking money in early to juice their
It was all
their
numbers, like they're all fixing the numbers to increase their share price.
Yeah.
Basically, made it like that. Okay, got you.
So
You managed to survive all of that.
managed to survive this period.
And you do eventually go on to raise quite a bit. Quite a bit.
And I think, but we always had a struggle. Like, I think the struggle was that we were operating in a fashion industry that was massively uncertain with constant stakeholder change, a UK market that was pretty much in negative growth, and a sense of like, we work with warehouse, suddenly that product team's not here anymore. They're on fire. They're like trying to sell the business. And like each type of company we'd work with in the UK had that sort of problem. So they wanted to do something more for does this juice us and make us look cool, innovative, and go forward? But the follow through wasn't necessarily there, or that team suddenly moved.
Yeah.
And the underlying business was on fire. So business was on fire, irrespective of how much you juice things. The attribution of our people buying more because of you or not was really unclear. We ended up having to build our own A/B testing platform to be able to try and understand our true impact. And in the end, it was a case of like, coming back to the random guy at the top of the gherkin, we ended up getting pulled out actually to Asia, where there were fast growing middle class markets who had young data savvy people who didn't have a lot of the sort of like structural problems that the UK market did. And like we got approached by, for example, again, another random piece of luck, Singtel, like Singapore Telecoms, wanting to be our exclusive partner for Asia. Right. And it was like, but why? Because basically McKinsey had done a deck for them saying that they should expand into making marketplaces. And as a part of getting marketplaces, they needed to have differentiating technology. And so that's what they wanted to do. And they came over and they wanted to pull us there. And I said, well, we're not in Asia. We're not going to do that. And if for us to do that and you want exclusivity, you've got to pay us the equivalent of if we worked with the number one player in Singapore market. And you need to, like, it needs to be a guaranteed deal. Like, and from our perspective, no play. You pay even if we don't do anything. And having worked in telcos before, I understood how they work with a view to their corporate people would have been incentivized on just getting deals done. They're not the people who are going to execute the deal. So unlike when you're working in a fashion company where it's like that product person is trying to basically make their metrics work, in this case, you've got a different set of corporate people. So I knew what was coming at us and therefore how we could play it. And that was quite amazing. I flew out with my business development person and we had the negotiating meeting and they wanted to pay us 70,000 for the year. And I said, no. You need to pay us 70,000 a month. And that's where we landed. So it's like 10 times difference to where they started and where we landed. And we landed in that night where I did typical thing of like, I'm standing over here, their key person standing the other side of the room, and they'd just done a deal with Shopify to become the base of that platform. So the president was there, Harvey. And so like my business development person and their business development talked, and they would come back to me and her and say, what do you think about this? Would you do this? I was like, okay, we'll do this if you do this. And therefore we landed giving them what they wanted and us guaranteed money, crucially.
Do you know what I love reflecting on with this story is
and it was a 2-year deal. So
I mean, in fact, how your personality shaped your personal reality. Going back, like the Tom when you were bouncing around, not really sure where you wanted to go or what was right for you or who you were, to this Tom who negotiated a 12 times deal, a 12x value deal that radically shaped the direction your business went in. I mean, that's a real growth story. That's a real like classic coming of age story in the business world, especially.
and my business development person who did that with me, he was a guy who started working for us for £8 an hour as an intern. And he had his own personal story where, yeah, I didn't interview the interns. I interviewed everyone, but the interns are like, and normally we've got really young people, and he was somebody who was a bit older. It's like, what's his story? And he'd been on a 2-year sabbatical, if you like, as a ski bum, because his father had died and he dropped out. And it transpired that he'd gone to the same college at Cambridge I'd gone, but 8 years later. And he's the hardest working person I'd ever met. So in terms of being prepared for that meeting and what we needed and how we needed to negotiate, he had everything that we needed. And then it was a case of like, adding the experience of, I know how these guys do deals and how we can get what we need. And off the back of getting that deal, and we crafted the deal then, and I knew everything was about speed. So we sent them the terms in the airport as we were flying back, so that we hoped that they'd sign it by the time we landed. And it ended up being like that. And then that guy, top of the gherkin, that enabled me to then say, right, okay, can you move out to Singapore for me? Which he did, and tried to basically grow that market, which was really hard. And he was a banker. He wasn't from a business development background, so it wasn't necessarily the right fit for what we wanted him to do. But when we then had an inquiry from a clothing manufacturer in Hong Kong, I was able to say to him, can you fly to Hong Kong? And he went, and he was from Hong, like his parents were from Hong Kong, and they were immigrants to the UK after 97. So he could relate then to that Hong Kong clothing manufacturing company, and they were the company that then ended up putting almost 20 million into the business, and in the long term buying the business. So, like, again, it's the dominoes, right? So one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. Like, Kelvin, you could say, was the wrong person to do business development in that region, but he was the right person to do, effectively was a corporate M&A deal and financing deal, and he had the right relatability to that family.
And you never would have been able to predict any of this. What was your mental state like? Where was your mindset at during this time? Because so many of these things are things you couldn't have predicted or controlled. So many of them were these moments of engineered serendipity. Did you ever feel lost throughout this process?
I would say, I think what I am is a problem solver and out of the box thinker. And I had some others who were good at that as well. So like over the course of the 11 years, I think what happened in a weird way was that my team got inured to worry, because they were like, oh, Tom will always figure something out. So they were never worried about us running out of cash.
Yeah. Did that ever put pressure on you?
Yeah, no, a huge amount. And I would say that it was a very difficult business to run, because we were always almost at a point of commercial traction growth, and then it didn't happen. And I would say at the same time that there was these serendipitous moments, there were also sort of potential long-term errors. So I would say that clothing manufacturing company came in, that was at a point where I wasn't looking for money. So again, I was able to be quite firm with them, but I didn't hold them account to my firmness with them. I said, I wanted a strategic partner. I'm not looking for money, so you have to come in on these terms. They were like, oh, we can introduce you to all of these companies because we work with them all. But I never held them to account to that, and they never did. And in fact, they were only really interested in our R&D in the long run for the clothing business, but they weren't really that interested or cared about commercialization. And that was a naivety on my front, because they always had cash to keep investing. They could have carried on giving 3 million a year every year, in the sense of that was interest on them, their cash, and therefore it was an option on the future. So having an amazing R&D team was a great thing. And as a consequence, I didn't push as hard on commercialization as I should have done. And they never wanted my R&D team to shrink. And having a big R&D team was a drag on the business from a commercial standpoint, right? That's money I have to pay. So that's gradually shrinking the equity size of the business, whilst we weren't commercializing fast enough. And we went through commercial moments where, again, for example, working with Defeaty in Brazil, and that's far away, far to get to. Worked really hard with them, and we were, from our data, and it was a constant battle, and our data showed that we were having massive positive impacts. And then that business switched. It was a Rocket Internet run business, from growth to profitability. And they were like, "Oh, can we not pay you for a year?" So that doesn't work for us. And we worked with Adeyoola in India, like third largest conglomerate in India, 40 billion business, and they were emerging into online fashion. We were part of their TV advertising campaign, like a key differentiating part. But then Flipkart raised another 3 billion. Amazon committed another 3 billion to market. And Mr. Burler said, "I'm no mug. I'm not going to throw billions at this space." Quit, shut the business down.
Every time you got closer.
That was out of our control. It's like, oh my God, like we were in 95% of their clothing. Again, like a great case study. And if we'd have had a few of those sit and consolidate over the course of the next 18 months, we'd have got to that next phase. And even at the end, having raised more money from Tal, our eventual acquirer, the trouble there was that they were just keep giving money, right? So it was a bit like getting addicted to crack. It was like they were always going to put more money in. But I mean, we should have needed to get a different other big investor at that point. Was that we just cottoned on to an arrowhead which could have pulled the business through. So we worked out how to do e-com imagery cheaper than existing methods. A difficult thing sometimes, like getting addicted to crack by having an investor who's willing to put money in. They want what they want, but that can generate blind spots. And I think over the last few years, we were trying to second guess, what does our investor need and want to keep them happy, to keep money rolling in. Commercialization was coming too slowly. But I would say in the last 18 months, we sort of hit upon an arrowhead to pull the business through, which was doing e-commerce imagery cheaper than existing methods, using our technology. And through that, by digitizing clothing, actually that was going to give us the assets that we could then use for virtual try-on. So it was almost like we're flipping the model. So we're going to give you e-commerce imagery that you're going to pay us for, because it's cheaper than your existing methods. So you don't have to be thinking, oh, this is an investment in innovation for potential upside. This is actually where you all got your heads on fire because you're operating in a low margin business. You can save money and get the upside for free. So, and by the upside, you can then just pay us on the upside. So that's where we'd got to, and we were starting to work with in that final year and a half. But it was like the money we would get was going to be, by gradually going through, you was going to tick up, but we were like basically charging out at low value per each garment image. And then through that, potentially we're going to build the volume of images that could be used for virtual trial. We were starting to work with like Puma, Lidl, Manchester City Football Club, Arsenal Football Club. Like our profile was changing. We were growing that bit rapidly, but our main investor didn't care about that stuff. Again, it was that thing of like, I don't care about the composed imagery stuff. I just want the R&D on and you sold clothing fit, because that's going to help my long-term business and potentially enable me to go direct to consumer and bypass potentially the retailers.
So this is a really interesting like product growth story for me, because the second startup I was ever a part of aimed to use AR technology to essentially allow someone to virtually try something on before they ever before they bought it, using mainly e-commerce. So going directly to e-commerce sellers, micro influencers with their Shopify businesses and things like this. And the technology wasn't super new, but it also wasn't used super often, which is why there was a little bit of demand there, which tells me that something that there's a reason why we don't see this technology everywhere in all of our shops, right? So where does the Metail story end?
Yeah, so I think where I got to at the end of that time was that we'd had a lot of money into the business. Our equity was being squeezed. In my view, we weren't commercializing fast enough. And with a view to how could you exploit our technology at scale properly, it was a clear realization for me that there were only a few players who could do that, right? So if you were shopping and buying from a normal clothing retailer, you might buy from them 2.5 times a year.
Okay.
So if you're really going to prove that your technology generates upside for that retailer, you sort of need to know after three, like they use your technology, then you want that behavior reinforced third time, fourth time. So you're talking about 18 months really to 2 years before you really see upside. And then you're basically trying to encourage behavior from a singular retailer. Whereas actually, if you're going to become a norm, my view is that you needed to work with somebody who has a much more regular relationship with you. So therefore you're willing to make the investment in building your profile and caring about it and shopping through your profile, Metail, rather than going retailer to retailer. So who has those types of relationships, like an Amazon, like somebody of that ilk. And also actually I felt that from a personal information perspective, actually the next leap we'd need to see would be through the social media players, right? So it's like how this could be the way that Facebook or Snapchat or equivalent could basically jump into and change the dynamic of shopping. So, because I would say currently, even like an Amazon platform is the old-fashioned search and destroy. Amazon works on the basis that you sort of know what you want when you're going there, and then you're looking for the price and the right product to match. Whereas fashion is a lot about discovery and feeling, and therefore shopping through you and knowing what you bought before and what you might want does make sense. So ASOS bought traffic by having 1,000 new garments per week, but it's only probably like 10 of those garments that are of interest and of value to you. So how could you basically narrow that down? And the problem with an ASOS, which is why I felt that those models were going to fail, was that they weren't selling through any better than the high street. So a high street went through seasons. So you'd have a season and you try and sell out as much of it as you can. And then that enables stockroom space to add the next season. But they would sell through at 65%. And ASOS is buying traffic by having newness so that people would come back more often to the website. But its sell-through is still the same, so 65%. So it's building a massive inventory of unsold stock. And that's okay just about when you're still growing. But the moment you stop growing, that's like driving up a hill with a trailer on a rope. It's taut and it's okay when you're going uphill. The moment you crest the hill and start going down, that trailer's going to destroy the business. And that's, I think, what you've seen over the last few years, which once the growth rate died in those businesses, Farfetch, ASOS, etc., the inventories crushed them. I think like an ASOS is, I mean, is it worth more than its debt? I'm not sure it is.
It's definitely not what it used to be.
No. So, and it never operated at a marginality better than high street. So it was operating at 2 to 4% margin, profit margin. So it's like, that's not a change in the game. And I think ultimately for us to succeed, what I realized was that the supply chain needed to change, and we needed to work with a retailer who thought differently about the supply chain, about how you could use 3D visualization of garments to present to a consumer, where they would then decide whether they liked it before you then basically buy the garment. And if you could basically change and dramatically shrink that supply chain, that's where you'd see the mass value in that virtual try-on period. So as I came out of Metail and sold it, it was like, well, the future really is localized on-demand manufacturing, where effectively you're showcasing stuff that's never been made before to a consumer to understand if they want to buy it. And then the moment they decide to buy it, you then make it.
And we are seeing that a lot more now, and social media has helped a lot. That's so interesting. Throughout this journey, your entire working career, you have described situations where you are working a lot and often in very demanding positions, right? When you were younger, working those 100 hours a week and you barely ever went home, you got a couple hours of sleep. I mean, right now, launching this show, I'm working maybe 25% more than normal-ish. I went up from roughly 60-hour weeks to roughly 80-hour a week the last few weeks while launching. And I can barely do that. I've never been very good at doing it. And then you manage these 100-hour weeks for ages, and then went on to start a company which had all these demands and all these pressures for 11 years or more.
Yeah.
I mean, what was your mental state like during this time? How did you keep up with it?
I think it's really hard because ultimately you can't get away from, when you're starting something, you're pushing a boulder up the hill.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have your shoulder to the boulder, it starts moving backward. And your aim is to try and get it over the hill, and then the momentum and to a sustainability level where it then starts rolling, and then things change, right, in terms of how much you need to operate and work. I think the hard thing, certainly like over 11 years, is working with that level of intensity quite consistently. I mean, but I would say that, like, if I think about my 11 years, I think I was very good at the beginning. I was very good at the end. And I think there was a flabbiness in the middle where it was like not knowing where we're going. And it was a fundraising journey, but we didn't have the sharpness of focus and the right sort of like leadership team that at the end we did have. And I obviously use this anecdote a lot, but one of my favorite films for youth is like Brewster's Millions, where Brewster, played by Richard Pryor, has to spend, I think, $11 million in 30 days in order to access his real inheritance, which is like 300 million or something like that. So, and he's not allowed to tell anyone, and he has to, at the end of the 30 days, end up with nothing, the shirt off his back. So he can't buy assets, so he has to rent, spend on services to spend that money. And one of the tasks he gets is he wants to build the perfect room, so he has people to try and make it. And each time he goes into the room, he goes, "No, it's not right. No, it's not right. Come on." And on that last day, it's like, "This is the room I would die in." And the person who's been working from the interior designer goes, "Thank God, everything out." And that's the moment. That's how it felt like with Metail. I would say like our management team and our way we were operating at the end was, I think, that was the moment where we were like 1 + 1 = 3. We were operating and humming perfectly. There are many periods along the way where we had amazing component parts, but we weren't quite operating. We weren't the sum of all our parts properly, or we had clever people who didn't get on, and people problems along the way, or the product wasn't quite in the right place, or hitting, and you want all bits to be moving in sync. And towards the end, that's where we were there, but we'd run out of road, if you like. And I think along that journey, and that last year and a half, just before that, I took 2 months paternity leave with my second child. My first child, I was back at work within 3 days, and the first year and a half of her life, I think I was on a plane every 2 weeks. So I was permanently jet lagged, like traveling. I was in Hong Kong 8 times in a year. That wasn't a good time. And I think when I took 2 months with Lana, actually it wasn't really 2 months, because in the first couple of weeks, I was just glued to the phone and unable to realize how to manage my time and eat and manage this child. But then my father-in-law went into coma, and my wife had to be on that. So then it was like, oh, I need to be present. And actually this timing, fortunate to be present now, and I need to be properly present. But I still was going into work on Fridays, because my wife, having gone back to work, had gone back to work 4 days a week. So she was in on Fridays. And I took Lana to go into management meetings on Tuesdays. So I'd go for a meeting, then go home. So I was still doing it a day and a bit. But I think that those 2 months probably prevented me from burning out hard, and it enabled me when I came back, despite me having done those 1.5 days, came back to like, this business plan that you built doesn't make sense. Like, I don't believe these numbers and this forecast. Like, we're in a lot of trouble here. I came back to then rescue the business, had to make like 20% cuts in head count, like within a month and a half, and then get some additional funding to put us in a position where it's like, we're going to have to sell the business. We're not growing fast enough. Like, we can't manage this cost base. I need to get the business to a shape where I've got 12 months to sell it. And I wouldn't have had that in it if I hadn't taken that bit. I wouldn't have had that energy. And then I think it's only like with hindsight realizing that, I was in denial. I was probably taking 30 ibuprofen a month period. I had central serous retinopathy at one point, which is retinal fluid leakage in my left eye, which meant I lost focal vision in part of it and retinal fluid leakage is a consequence of excess cortisol, which is a consequence of too much. So, I was
surviving on adrenaline and eventually,
and you get addicted to it, and you like it. And I think also, like, running my company, I put myself last always. So I didn't have lunch regularly at the right time. I didn't drink enough, didn't do all of those things. It was like company first, staff, then family, then me. It's very,
your order of priority is all out of whack. I mean,
because you're pushing the boulder, and at that point you're pushing boulder for so long, and the burden is hard. And I think going back to those things, right? So like talking about past, I build up history and experience of getting through things so that you know that you will, and you just do. That's not to say that you like it. I mean, I like pressure. I think I'm a wartime CEO.
Okay.
When things aren't happening, I get bored and lazy. But at the same time, in thinking about how I'd want to run things in the future, I would definitely not be a solo founder. Next time around, I would want to be more as a team. And having been out of running my company for 5 years, got a better balance with my family, and my family are more first. But even then, when I was running Metail, I was like aiming to be home for bedtime in the latter years, and more of us leadership team had kids, so we were leaving work and then going back online later. I thought that was interesting then for how culture sort of changed, which was difficult. Of like, the earlier teams were used to us always being there, and therefore always being there. And then when we're not there and going home at 6, the younger people that you then hire don't know that you're still working when you go home. So they leave. So then it becomes the sort of like next generation, if you want to have a hardworking culture, are the ones who distill that culture into the next lot. And how do you make sure, and we spent a lot of time trying to work out how to make sure we were an outcome focused culture over and above everything else. So it's about you getting the job done, and that makes sense. And how does that filter through to the next generation?
All of that pressure and that strain on your mental health, was it worth it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's hard to say. There's what I don't know what a counterfactual will be, right? So everything that I am today is a consequence of every decision I've ever made, for good and for bad, right? So there were definitely plenty of bad moments, definitely troughs, and I think as a ecosystem, we don't talk enough about the bad times. There's a sense of like having to say that you're crushing it all the time, and not show vulnerability. And I do see that problem with some founders. Like certainly first-time founders are always trying to say how good they are and that they can do everything. And actually second-time founders are like, these are the reasons not to invest in this business, and these are the things that I have to try and solve, over and above everything else, and here are all the weaknesses, right? So they understand how to speak that way, and that is how you need to be. And that gives the first time founder doesn't realize that's what gives confidence of like you knowing where your weaknesses are, and okay, let's figure things out around that. You can't be good at everything. And I think I wouldn't have it any other way, in the sense of like really enjoyed my career. It's put me into spaces and with people and had experiences that I wouldn't have had if I'd had a corporate job. Like I look at people I know who went into banking all their career and certainly have accumulated more wealth than I have over that period, but I don't envy them. And I feel that they're quite a few of them, my old friends from school, it feels like they're in midlife crisis and quite empty and don't have a purpose and don't know what they're about, or have just been in the cycle, in the hamster wheel, and are only just popping out and thinking, shit, what was that all about? Or what was that for?
20 years flew by for them.
Yeah. Whereas I feel that I've been able to do lots of different things and have impact. And if an influence policy, influence people, built amazing teams, watched people grow, being able to follow my interests. I mean, if anything at the moment, like the downside, obviously, like I think from all of that adrenaline, etc., is that I do have headache problems, which I can manage now with medication. And potentially it's hereditary because my youngest now is got similar. But hopefully by getting to early, did an MRI scan with her last week. I will solve my headache problems through her. Because healthcare, people are more focused on children. But no, I don't regret any of it. Not one bit. Every decision took me to where I am. I think actually I know more about what it takes and what it is. I think there was a lot of naivety in the early days, certainly around my cohort of other founders, where with a lot of the cohort of founders, the obsession was about being the cult. The cult, it was around the cult of the CEO.
Okay.
Like being a Zuckerberg or something. Just
Sure,
like, well,
the ego behind it.
the ego thing of like achieving that status.
Got
It's
you.
like, I'm not interested in that bit. It's like, I'm the outcome focused. I want to achieve the mission. And fundamentally with my startup, I failed in my mission. Like the startup failed. We were very close to a massive exit, which collapsed the day we were supposed to sign terms.
Again.
Yeah. So it's like, as well as, you can only focus on the lucky things to happen, but there were also unlucky things.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think, well, if that deal had come through and had sold the business, I wouldn't have been clean out. I would have been on an earn out. And I sold the business July 2019. my father-in-law, who had been in a coma and come out of that and died 2 months later. And then COVID started a few months after that. So I would have been in the middle of a hardcore earnout at a period where my family needed me and I wouldn't have been available to them. And at the end of that next year, I had a headache breakdown where maybe that would have been more catastrophic. So actually being available for my family in that moment was like a money can't buy.
Yeah, worth more than any buyout could have been.
Yeah.
Most people statistically die with regrets. And I think despite all the challenges you faced in that journey is a real privilege and thankfulness that comes with going, I have no regrets, and being able to say it confidently. And throughout this conversation, you've shared a lot of lessons with us. And to a listener who is a young leader in business or a new leader in business, like a first-time founder, for example, what are some of the biggest lessons and takeaways you think they need to understand from all of this?
I think the thing that my career has enabled me to believe very strongly is that you have agency, right? And you've got to believe in agency. And agency, to that point about the serendipity thing, it was about like you can put yourself in the room for something to happen. If you have a strong belief on something, you can find your ways to meeting with people around to give that opinion to try and make a change. So, and I've subsequently, since finishing with Metail, like a strong belief for me was like, follow the money. There's not enough venture capital in the startup ecosystem. That's key to basically the next phase of growth in the whole ecosystem. How do I do that? Right. Okay. I push on the doors of like, potential politicians, shadow ministers, go to events, ask questions. And then all of a sudden, like, I'm co-authoring the startup review for Rachel Reeves, right, which becomes policy. So it's like you can figure your way there. And I think doing side hustles and things, like certainly for people who haven't become founders yet, is an important proving ground and training ground for how to get into spaces. And I think when I managed a band, I wasn't from the music industry, I learned that the music industry is small. And like you can penetrate it. Like you can get to the people with a bit of time and a bit of persistence. Persistence defeats resistance. And you can learn about product. You can learn about marketing in different ways at a smaller scale and then work your way up. And I think certainly like trying to learn, I worked for 5 startups before starting my own. So I learned about a lot of mistakes that people were making on other people's money through other people before I then figured out where I thought I was going to add my value add and what I needed to try and differentiate and move forward. And I think back to that networking point, networking was a dirty word for me, but I think it's hugely important. You've got to find your ways into rooms where people might be, where your customer set might be, where your investor set might be. And you can get there, you can get into those spaces, and it requires less work than you might think sometimes, because again, that point about like the world is a triangle and there's a small group at the top of each industry, each sector, each funding position, each talent set. So it's like, how do you work your way? How do you figure out by going to an event, working your way into figuring out how to get into that group? And once you've gone to 3 events, you suddenly know like 20% of the people there. You go to 4 events, you suddenly know like 50% of the people there. And I think the other bit that is really important, back to that point I made about vulnerability, is to know what you don't know and don't be afraid of it. Like that is key. I think working out how to be confident at certain times and also be vulnerable and be unafraid to ask for help at key times and understand how to work smarter, not harder. Like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like I think one of my key strengths is I'm not always trying to do that, but I'm trying to find the shortest cut to get something done. So it's like, who do I know who might be able to give me the answer rather than spending 10 hours trying to figure it out by myself. And that, like, having a strong understanding of everyone you meet and what they do, and trying to understand that shape, and therefore being curious about what people do on the basis of like, oh, if I learn about somebody, that might help me in the long run. It might not. I might not know what that will be about, but at some point it will come back to me. That generates those lucky moments.
That faith in what is to come if you put the right components into place. Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show so far. I just wanted to take one quick sec to ask you for a huge favor. If you've been appreciating the show, the guests, the lessons, the journey we've been on, then the best way you can help out, to help me and help everybody else listening to this, is to subscribe to the show wherever you are. YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you're watching the show. Hit the subscribe or follow or whatever other button, and all the bells and icons, whatever else you're happy to keep up to date with the show, hear about new episodes as soon as they launch, and help us to grow and reach more people. I know you've heard this before, but it's because it really does help. It really would help out and makes the world of difference to me. So thank you in advance. And honestly, I really appreciate you. And one final quick note here. I wanted to draw your attention to my free weekly newsletter discussing a variety of topics to do with leadership development and discovery over on Substack. I'm always so humbled by all of the kind words of support I've received over the years from people reading my newsletters about how interesting or helpful that they've been. So if you want that extra hit of the thought-provoking conversation once a week, then you can find that in the show notes down below. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And let's get it.
Pay it forward. Like, I think thinking about that, and it is that faith. It's like, which is a hard thing, right? Because it's almost like that karmic idea of, if I do good today, then the good will come back to me.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, it's very easy to believe that being a self-centered, selfish asshole is the way to achieve success. Achieve success in some ways for some people, but I believe if you want to have success that you are proud of, and you want to end your life with a whole bunch of people who are grateful for your existence in it, then the more pay it forward approach and sort of believing in what goes around comes around is going to take you to a happier place than being a dick.
Great summary. I love that. How would you, with this reflection and hindsight, summarize what it means to you to be a leader?
I think I've always felt that I sort of lead by example. I don't ask people to do things I wouldn't be prepared to do myself. So, I'll always be the person's sleeves rolled up, cleaning at the end of the night. If we've done an event, I'll be there I'll be the last person. I will do the grunt work. And ultimately, I think from a company perspective, I think my roles were sort of threefold. Set the strategy and vision, be the chief optimism officer, and to get rid of obstacles in the pathway for people to perform. That was it. My job is, in the service of everyone else, is to take away obstacles, and be that obstacles in money, be that obstacles in bureaucracy and process, be that obstacles in the form of like them not knowing how to get to A, B, and C. So I felt that I had to be available in the company to hear issues and problems quickly, to be able to make the company more efficient and enable people to operate at their potential and move forward. I think that comes from a place of being, from a place of trust in people and faith in people wanting to reach their own potential, rather than control. So I believe in that adage of like A team people hire A team people, B team people hire C team people. So you want to hire smart people and then give them the tools to surprise you and to excel in their roles. And I think that's the bit that I like and loved about startups. It comes back to the school system of like, if I work hard, I achieve and I get feedback. In a startup, you've got 101 problems. So if there are people who come and they solve problems, you get given more. So, and that's your pathway to progress. Whereas I think in structured corporates have structures and process which mitigate for employees being bad at their job. So the process will happen, the company will progress irrespective of how talented you are in your particular job role. So that cuts off your potential. It doesn't allow you to overachieve. It also doesn't allow you to fail. So in that instance, the company moves at the speed the company moves. It can't go faster. Whereas I think if you hire good people in a startup, you can go fast. You can go as fast as your people can allow you to go fast. But that means you need to allow them to be able to overachieve. And you need to have the processes and the trust and the faith to enable them to do so.
There's a trust element. There's a service element. There's being the one to lead the charge element. And therefore, there's almost this empathetic element. There's an inspiration element to all of this because you've got to set something that others are going to aspire to. And this paints a really energizing picture. Do you think the state of worldwide leadership is reflecting those kind of qualities? Where do you feel like we're at? Because the world can feel like such a challenging place to be in, especially right now.
I think it's super hard right now to be a leader. In the main, because of the comms pressure that you're under, and the constant visibility of everything that you're doing. So, I think people are almost expecting to have access to you and to have a comment from you, everything, all the time,
and immediately,
well, like, what's your view on this? Like, what? And it's like, what does that relate to my job, my role? I've set out my values. Should I have to reinforce that for you to believe it time and time again? We should be able you should be able to believe me and where we're going and then work to that rather than me having to constantly comment along the way.
The whole world feels like a low trust environment.
Yes.
And so everyone doesn't trust you, no matter how much, almost regardless of how much trust you want to put in them.
And it's an infantilizing environment as well. Yeah. It's this sense of like, a primary school teacher having to like constantly like talk to you, tell you, reassure you where we're at, rather than an element of like, you shouldn't need that. And I think there's been a massive bleed. I see it with things like LinkedIn today is what Facebook was 10 years ago.
I know.
It's like, I struggle with that. And I struggle with that sense of like going on to these type of platforms where people feel the need to tell what they're having for breakfast every day, which is what I complained about Facebook 10, 15 years ago. But also that has become the profile building element of it has become more important than what you do. What you say you're going to do shouldn't be more important than what you actually do. And I battle that with that all the time. Like, sure, should I be doing more profile stuff? No, because I believe that I want to be judged by what I do and achieve. And I will say that the thing, and actually I'm very transparent. All of my views are out there. You can Google them and you can find them. I don't need to then add my view on top of something else, because I don't feel that people need to hear my opinion on X, Y, and Z. It's like where I'm strong and where I have views on something, I will put those out there, but I don't need to like bleed into other areas. And I think certainly a lot of companies, that's a hard thing these days about seeing CEOs. How do you navigate everything you talk about, and everything has become more and more values based, right? And I think people have put leaders into such a high pedestal that they can only fail. It's a bit like that Batman quote about die the hero or live long enough to become a villain.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, that's so interesting. As we start to wrap up the conversation today, what would you encourage leaders to do or to work on, or what perspective to adopt to deal with that challenge? How does one navigate a world that feels like no matter how hard you work at it, has set you up to fail?
I think still for me, it's always what you've got to keep talking about vision. Like, I think vision is important and undervalued. Like, where are you going? Why are people on your journey with you? Where are you going towards? I think in politics, we've lost in particular, we lost a lot of vision setting. That part, I think, is a big failing, because if you don't set the vision, other people will set it for you, and you need to fill that void. I think alongside that, I think you've got to have the vision, you've got to have the realism, and you've got to have a sense of, like, for me, it's like, why are people on the journey with you? What are your common set of goals, and why do we come in to work together? And being very clear in terms of reinforcing that and reiterating that with people. And also understanding, like, a big thing for me was trying to depersonalize your position with employees, in the sense of, by that I mean, everybody's on their own journey, right? So somebody who comes to work for you, you just want them to do great work while they're with you on their journey. And you hope when they leave you, they go on to even better, greater things. And it's like, it's a pathway, and everybody will be on their journey. You can't take it personally if somebody wants to leave. You can't prevent them from leaving. You just want to make sure that that in the transaction of the give and take, that it works well for both parties. And you want to be good to people on the way out as much as you were good to people on the way in.
Committed to them and to the result, but not attached to all the minor details.
Yeah.
Not that they're not expecting that they're a personal reflection of who you are, and that that's simply what is happening.
And I think an important point, like one of the key slides I think I remember from the infamous Netflix culture deck, is that notion of, like, you're not a family, right? So
I remember hearing this,
you want to work with stunning people, and I think I've got my enjoyment through my career from working with talented people and people who could do what I couldn't do. And that is like, that's what I find inspiring. And right now in my, not working for a company period, I miss it, right? So I like following my interests, giving advice to different startups and working on different projects, but I miss being part of a great team, attacking a really hard problem together and winning and defeating challenges in that way, in the same way that I loved like playing team sports, and I miss that now that I'm older and decrepit. But it's but it's that sense of, like, families are too tolerant of people's mistakes and foibles, and you put up with them. And it's like, no, you need to work like a Formula One team where you've all got your jobs, and like the guy who's going to take the nuts off the wheel to get them off is as important as everyone else. And you need to work in unison and in a direction, and you share in the good times as well as the bad. And you understand that other people depend on you, and you won't let them down. And I think that's important. And I think at certain points, when I talked about that sort of like flabby middle of Metail, I think I was overly obsessed with making the workplace a great place to work. And I think people loved working at Metail. And I think that overbalanced against high performance.
Oh, interesting.
So like and in part because I had a difficult leadership team at one point where I had too many similar people who didn't get on. They were all super talented, but it made it a real grind because they did not like each other. And then trying to make a really likable, great working environment where people didn't want to leave. And it's like, well, actually,
Sometimes you
that's
need
not a
people
good
to
thing.
move on.
You need to have a healthy chat. You need to have a healthy respect for each other.
Yeah. But some of these things, like no matter how much you tell them to people, tell them to our listeners, tell them to new founders, some of these things, you kind of need to go through yourself to fully get it. I think we can know and not understand.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting. And with all that understanding, what's next for you? What can we expect from Tom in the next 11 years?
Yeah, I mean, my current thought process is I've had 5 years of going plural in part by accident, like trying to solve like health challenges, family challenges. And I think I've got I counted yesterday, I think I've got 14 different projects, like 10 board-esque type seats of various types.
Sure.
It's too many. I'm trying to reduce that down to like 5.
Even that's a lot.
Yeah,
Wow.
even that. And then I miss being operational. So my goal is to go operational again. But in terms of balancing with family, my view is that in the next 4 years, my youngest will be at primary school. And I'm willing and interested to work for someone or work in an organization which matches my values and my core goals for the next 4 years until she hits secondary school, and then go back to building again.
Building down.
Because building is so all-encompassing,
Yes.
I think the childcare and the sort of like management phase of children needs to be over to go back into that, because then I'll be in the coaching phase, and that's different.
Yeah.
Equally challenging in other ways, but
yeah.
it would be less impacted by being away a lot.
Yeah.
And fully headed into
That's such a wise reflection, though. I love it. Tom, I've appreciated this conversation so much. I've got an ending question that I like to ask everyone. The show is called Lost and Searching, and I'd love to know, are there any answers in life that you are still searching for?
I think the thing that I've never quite solved really is like that personal balance and whether it matters. I think people have always talked about work-life balance, and I think when I listen to American guys speak about it once on a call, and this is somebody who'd had several breakdowns, it's like, it's not about work-life balance, it's about work-life harmony. And they both got, it's never going to be a case that they're both equal at all times. There are moments when your family needs everything, and the moments when your work needs everything. And in those moments, the other things have got to work. And do they harmonize? The bit that I can sort of do that with everything, but I still haven't found how I personally, in terms of like my health, fitness, how I sustainably fit that into the middle of it. I go through like periods of like exercise, and then I try and exercise like I used to do 10 years ago, and I end up with some sort of injury, and I always subjugate myself in that equation, and I don't know if that's a problem or not. I think mainly as long as I'm enjoying what I'm doing, I think that's the key thing. And as long as in enjoying what I'm doing, it's not detrimental to everyone else, that's hard. And I think that the other part, which is difficult, which I found more difficult since I've not been in a company when I'm doing plural, is that I'm involved in a lot of projects, and I don't have a natural set of people who are also involved in those things to discuss them with, like of a day to day. Like when you're in a company, you can talk about the company, right? And home life, you can talk about with home life, but then there's this gray bit in the middle of like, oh, I did this today. It's like, well, who cares about that? Like, no, and sort of figuring out how to like blend that back together of like a set of people. Again, this is about nourishing myself personally. How can I have that set of people who are interested in the same things, or bits of it who I can talk to, and get the health and fitness bit together. I'd love to be doing more sport. I don't do it as much. I'd love to be going to the theatre more. Love to be going to see a lot more live music. But I don't. What would I cut out to do that? And some of them it's like, well, I'll come to those in other periods. These other things are more important. So I'm still searching for those,
where the harmony comes.
Yeah, how to pull it all together.
It's so important because it's, as I like to say, it's all an evolving journey of discovery. We're all on this journey. We're all in this discovery of whatever is next and whatever is right for us at every stage. We're always in discovery of something. And actually that's great, because if we didn't have that, like how boring.
Yeah.
Be,
and that's the thing, like you want to stay curious and interested. I think therefore you should always be searching.
I love it. That harmony point is great. It's literally only a couple of months ago, I first heard Jim Quick reframe balance to harmony. And you're so right. What a beautiful takeaway. Tom, this conversation is giving me a very particular type of energy, which is a quote from Pericles, where he says, what matters is not what is written about you in stone monuments, but what is written in the hearts of others. Really roughly, I'm paraphrase that a little bit, but Tom, I think that reflection is where your values lie, and it comes out in everything you do. So I just want to say a huge thank you. You're one of the first dozen or so people I'm speaking to on this show, for giving me your time, for giving all of us your time, passing on those lessons, that wisdom. It just means a lot. So thank you so much for being here, for sharing.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been wonderful.